none of us will have to go through something that drastic. But what we need to do is just to take it down to the lower notches where we're at. You know, maybe your husband, maybe your wife is going through a tough time right now, and you might resent that a little bit. You might think, hey, I've been carrying the weight a long time. Well, certainly you don't want to encourage anybody to not pull their fair share. But on the other hand, if they can't, well then, as a Christian, we just keep on carrying the weight until they can get up again. So the roles, if you see the roles from God's perspective, they work beautifully. Let's talk about those roles. Go back to, Frank introduced for us the Ephesians reading, and very well. Let's just pick it up where he left off. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the model after which the roles in marriage were designed. In your outline, I put together verses 22, 25, and 32. They read like this. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy. You see these comparisons? They're always comparing to Christ, to the church. And then he puts it together and he says at the end, this is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. Now, I don't pretend to understand everything in this particular passage, but this much I do understand. I do understand that Jesus Christ is all-powerful God, and I know that he would never, ever use that power as God to do anything that would in any way hurt the people that he died to save. That he would always and will always use that infinite power for our good. And I understand that the church will never hurt Christ. So what is that telling us about marriage? It's telling us you don't ever take your role. You don't ever take your strengths. You don't ever take your abilities and abuse them to take advantage of the other person. That's the pattern that we have. Now, let's talk about what the word submit means. Now, let's talk about what the word leader or headship means. With that understanding that just as Christ uses his tremendous power and might always for our good, let's translate that to real life situations. Men, let's begin with men. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own body. He who loves his wife loves himself. Now, on the about 2/3 of the way down the page of 4, just under that passage, there's, I think, a very good definition of what headship is all about. Would you read that with me, men? Headship is the divine calling of a husband to take primary responsibility for Christ-like servant leadership, protection, and provision in the home. Think about that. It's not, hey, do this, get me that, it's my right. It's rather, here are the needs of my family, and it is my responsibility to meet those needs. Now, I know that every guy here, that's what your attitude is. Do we do it perfectly? No, we don't do it perfectly. We sometimes, though, make some mistakes with it. We do understand that we do need to take responsibility for leadership in the home and meeting our family's needs. But where we sometimes make mistakes is we pick and choose. We choose the ones that are easy for us. I'll be the breadwinner. I'll take care of the finances. I'll take care of the yard work. I'll take care of the cars. And our wives love us for that. They do. But they sometimes say, but there's some things that I need your help with. And those are the things we sometimes don't like to do. Like, it has to do with the kids a lot. It has to do with discipline. It has to do with, keeping them from fighting with each other. Going to PTA meetings, stuff like that, The stuff that we, they're not manly things. And sometimes we kind of, push those off. And so it's important for us to talk to our wives and say, I'm very serious about this whole matter of taking responsibility, being out in front. I want to make sure that I'm taking responsibility for those areas where you need help. When a man senses that his responsibility as a husband and as a father is to provide for his family financially, to make sure that when the family comes home, it is a safe area, it's a safe environment, where there's calm, where there's dignity, where people can be allowed to maybe try something and fail and not be condemned but picked up. When a man senses that his primary responsibility is to be a spiritual leader. Doesn't have to necessarily know everything about the Bible, but is saying, okay, we do need to pray here. We do need to talk about this from a Christian perspective. We need to, what does God want us to do here? When a man understands that and takes the lead, what wife isn't going to love that? What wife is going to see him as a abusive, tyrannical? Because she's going to see God himself working in you. We're all works in progress. Ladies, give us time. But if you see your husband trying earnestly to be that kind of man, give him encouragement. And that's really your role. Paul in Ephesians goes on, he says, wives, submit to your husbands in everything, or to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Ladies, you've got a definition for submission in your bulletin, your role. Would you read it with me? Submission is the divine calling of a wife to honor and affirm her husband's leadership and help carry it through according to her gifts. Now, the word submit in our society, it conjures up the idea of this older woman, very, very thin, exhausted always, with her hair all over the place, saying yes, yes, yes. And that's not at all. That's not at all. Submission comes in so many different forms. What's the idea? The idea is to work together with your husband to make him the leader that God wants him to be, and to complete your role as the woman God wants you to be. Now that's going to take on a lot of different forms, and it's going to depend upon your husband's personality. Now, some women are pretty derisive about their husband's leadership abilities, and they question his judgment and so on. But before they want to take his place, they better remember that they're the ones that chose him as their husband. So maybe their judgment isn't so good either. But seriously, it takes on different forms. If your husband is a more aggressive, assertive, personality A type, well then maybe your support is going to be the more behind the scenes type. But some guys are more laid back. Some guys are casual. Some guys are just, I'm not really assertive type. In that case, you may, as a supportive role, be in the forefront, be assertive, but not with the idea of, well, I'm better than you are, you can't do it, you big oaf, but rather to compliment him. But seriously, when there's competition in anything, what are there? There are winners and there are losers. And I guarantee you, there isn't anybody in the world that likes to lose. If competition marks marriage, there's difficulty. So women, remember that. Remember that. You don't need to compete with your husband. You don't need to. God has made you differently to fulfill a different role. So the key is, what it really comes down to? It really comes down to looking at the guy and saying, I'm going to do everything to walk through the gates of death into heaven with you. It's not about marrying the perfect guy. It's about doing everything to please the perfect guy. That's what brings blessing. There's this whole thing about soulmates and everything today, that there's one person